The civil rights movement began in the 1950s. Before the movement gained momentum, segregation was a horrifying reality that played a big part in the South. The Jim Crow laws were established in the 19th century to keep African Americans marginalized and separated from whites. Blacks weren't allowed to use the same facilities as whites, live in the same areas, go to the same schools, and made it nearly impossible for them to vote. The black community could no longer stand the harassment. People started taking simple acts to protest against the unfairness. A well-known example of a simple yet significant small act was taken by Rosa Parks, who refused to sit in the back of the bus. It was little movements like these that slowly gave momentum to the civil rights era.
The Brown v. Board of Education was a landmark 1954 Supreme Court case, and it is one of the cornerstones of the civil rights movement and helped establish the precedent of the separate but equal. The separate but equal leads to the Jim Crow law, saying that racial segregation was established. A plaintiff named Oliver Brown filed a suit against the Board of Education because his daughter Linda Brown got denied to an all-white elementary school. In his lawsuit, Brown has claimed that segregation violated the Equal Protection Clause, which is the 14th Amendment, and is saying that no states deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws.
The Civil Rights of 1957 was signed by Eisenhower, which permitted federal prosecution for anyone who suppressed anyone's right to vote. Eisenhower sent this proposal to Congress, but due to his unpopular opinion, the act was modified for congressional approval, which is the act that stands today. The original proposal called for the authorities to investigate discriminatory conditions and act upon it with federal prosecution, but the act was weakened in order to be approved.
The Civil Rights Act of 1964 provided equal employment opportunities as it banned employers from discriminating against workers by race, gender, or religion. It also prohibited the segregating of public places. This led to people with power to act on the injustices, such as President Kennedy introducing a Civil Rights Bill in 1963 and Lyndon Johnson passing the Civil Rights Act of 1964. As shown in this example,
Malcolm X was assassinated during a Nation of Islam rally in 1965, and 3 years later, in 1968, MLK was assassinated in his hotel room. These murders catapulted the civil rights movements into new heights. As their deaths added even more fuel to supporters, MLK's death brought out more violence than he intended to, as his supporters took a more violent approach to protests. Days after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. on April 11th of 1968, the Fair Housing Act was put into law. It prohibited house discrimination based off of sex, race, and religion. The Fair Housing Act marked the end of the civil rights movement era, but was this really a satisfying enough end, or even an end at all?
Yes, the civil rights movement may be over as full integration into society was won over, but the fight for social justice never ends for African Americans. A new controversy and fight has brewed in the form of police brutality. Racial profiling from police forces around the country have led to unarmed and even innocent black men being shot down and killed for not cooperating. This isn't new, as the rivalry between cops and blacks goes back to the civil rights movement, but the power of social media and today's news has pushed the agenda to new heights. This showcases the never-ending struggle for societal acceptance for African Americans, going from one issue to another.